People like me, I have friends. Heads I apologize for and explain my absence. Tails I tantalizingly ask, did you miss me? And if I drop it on the floor, then I'll just ignore it and move on with the video. Who didn't think that that was gonna happen? Have you ever been in a situation where someone walked up to you and just kind of started in the middle of a conversation like you should know exactly what they're talking about? It can sometimes start with some sort of question that you don't really know the context to, or in the case of what I'm about to tell you about, a vague introduction like, hello, I'm here to make up a missed assignment. Well, I've recently discovered that I'm very guilty of assuming that people always know what I'm talking about, and the example I just gave is exactly how I started my interaction with my nutrition and health professor just a few weeks ago. Let's take a look at the information I failed to provide and then conclude how I should have begun the interaction. First, I didn't even tell her my name, which, considering that I'd been emailing her all week, might have been enough to fill in the rest of the gaps, but let's assume that it wouldn't have been. Second, I didn't tell her which of her classes I'm in, of which I'm sure she has many. Third, I didn't tell her why I'd missed the assignment to begin with. And finally, though I might be missing something, I didn't remind her of what the actual assignment was. So let's recap how I introduced myself. Hello, I'm here to make up a missed assignment. Do you see all the information gaps now? Good. Now let's see how I could have briefly but politely provided all the necessary information in such a way that would have allowed our interaction to continue with no questions asked. Maybe I could have said something more like, hello, I'm Amanda Scott from your 9:30 Nutrition and Health class. I emailed you last week about being sick, and I'm here to make up the slideshow response assignment we talked about on Tuesday. A little wordy, maybe, but I successfully relayed to her all the information not only that she already knew and related to me, but also that she needed to know in order to continue from that point on. Now, of course, this sort of thing doesn't always happen at the beginning of a conversation. In fact, I think it's way more common when someone is kind of in the middle of a conversation and they digress to something back to what you were talking about earlier, but they forget to mention the fact that they're actually digressing. And yes, to answer the question you didn't ask, I am going to be using the word digress in all its various forms as much as humanly possible for the rest of this video because, much like Silly Goose, I'm bringing it back. So normally this is the point in my videos where I start to give you advice of how you can break yourself of this behavior, and I will do that, of course. Because if it ain't broke, don't fix it. But I feel like I should preface my advice with the fact that most of the time this behavior is totally innocent and honestly not that big of a deal. That said, the extent to which I've found myself doing it as of late is a bit extreme and probably to the point of being kind of rude, and it kind of does need to change. Alright, advice time. First, always consider your starting point. Depending on whether you're starting at the beginning of a conversation or simply digressing back to something you were already talking about, there's a different level of information needing to be provided in each case. If you want to call that point 1A, then point 1B would come to the same conclusion about needing to provide a different level of information, but instead it would address who you're talking to and the relationship you've already established with that person. Like in my case, I had only talked to my professor one other time, and I was also starting in at the beginning of a conversation, meaning that I needed to provide the maximum amount of information I had at my disposal. The second thing to do is always assume that the other person doesn't know what you're talking about. I'm not saying you should assume the other person's stupid, that's a totally different thing. I'm just saying that you shouldn't assume that everyone can follow your train of thought. Like, I find myself assuming that people think in the same linear fashion as I do, and that's simply not the case. Thank the Lord, am I right? A way to deal with this is to always act like you're parroting back some sort of question like you would if you were writing the thesis to an expository paper. My third and fourth pieces of advice are to help you keep up with others when they go all digressy on you, and they're pretty simple steps. Third, just listen. Listening too closely to someone you're actually supposed to be listening to has never gotten anyone in trouble, ever. Not listening, on the other hand, well, just ask anyone who's been in a relationship for more than a week and I'm sure they'll have a story to tell. Finally, don't be afraid to ask questions. This piece of advice is useful in many situations, and honestly the only thing that might keep you from following it is being afraid to look stupid, which is stupid in itself, and I'll tell you why. Just think about it. Would you rather ask a question and keep up with the situation, or kind of fake your way through it and end up saying something totally irrelevant and at best looking like a space cadet and at worst looking totally ignorant? Alright, let's recap. Always consider where you're starting from and who you're talking to in order to determine how much information you need to provide. Never assume everyone can follow your exact train of thought. Listen, and don't be afraid to ask questions. I don't know about you, but I thought that was a solid conclusion. So tell me, do you find yourself constantly digressing, or do you hang around someone who is? Feel free to leave your stories and such in the comment section down below, and while you're down there, don't forget to like, subscribe, favorite, comment, all that stuff, because that's what the internet's for, right? Good. Now let's see how I could... See, I have friends.